Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that absolutely defies everything we know about human endurance, grief, and the relentless pursuit of justice. We're going to unpack a true crime case that is, quite frankly, as baffling as it is heartbreaking. So settle in. We're tracing a 26-year timeline of sheer, unbelievable dedication to uncover a twist that literally no one could have seen coming. It's a profoundly deep journey through an entirely unprecedented sequence of events.
How far would you go to find your wife's murderer? I mean, really. I want you to stop and put yourself in those shoes for a second. Imagine the absolute soul-crushing devastation of losing the person you love most in the world, compounded by the agonizing frustration of having zero answers. For a man named Satoru Tokaba, this wasn't just some hypothetical thought experiment. It was his daily, inescapable reality. And his answer to that question? Well, it goes way, way beyond what anyone could have possibly imagined.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at Satoru's unbelievable commitment.
26. Think about the weight of that number for a moment. 26 years. You know, when faced with the ultimate tragedy, human beings cope in wildly different ways. Some people absolutely have to move on, they just have to leave the past behind to survive. But others, they hold on tight. Satoru took holding on to a completely different, almost incomprehensible level of dedication. So Satoru and his son moved out of the apartment where this unimaginable crime happened. But he didn't let the apartment go. He actually kept paying the rent on that entirely empty apartment for 26 years. Month after month, year after year, for over 2.5 decades, he handed over his hard-earned money for a place he wasn't even living in. Why on earth would he do that? Simply to preserve the crime scene. He kept it exactly as it was, a perfectly untouched time capsule of the worst day of his life, functioning as his own personal, perfectly preserved evidence room.
Section 2, the 1999 cold case. Let's step back to understand the hopeless stakes that forced such a drastic choice. To really wrap our heads around the sheer necessity of what he did, we have to look backward. In 1999, Satoru found his wife murdered in their home. But beyond the absolute horror of the act itself, there was a complete and utter vacuum of information. I mean, there were zero leads. There was no forced entry, which, let's be honest, is always an incredibly terrifying detail because it suggests a level of comfort, familiarity, or a highly calculated approach by the killer. And faced with this total lack of evidence, the police simply gave up. The trail went entirely cold. This wasn't just a tough case. This was a brick wall, and the authorities had absolutely nothing left to pursue. But Satoru, he completely refused to accept that dead end.
Section 3. Science finally catches up.
And this brilliantly illustrates the chronological bridge his dedication built. See, if the police couldn't help him back in 1999, Satoru knew he had to rely on something else entirely: the future. He had this unwavering, incredible belief that forensics would eventually evolve. He was essentially betting everything on the forward march of scientific technology. So, in 1999, tragedy strikes, and the trail goes totally cold. Then, we have this staggering 26-year gap, a massive chasm of time where the literal only thing keeping this case alive was Satoru paying rent on that empty room, acting as the sole guardian of the truth. And then, just last year, the breakthrough. A DNA match was finally made.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a direct sequence of events. His patience paid off in the most incredible way, because he preserved the crime scene exactly as it was, perfectly untouched, and simply waited for technology to catch up. Japanese police were eventually able to extract a modern DNA profile from the hidden, microscopic evidence left behind in that room. That DNA matched a local woman, and when confronted with undeniable scientific proof, she confessed immediately. His 26-year gamble worked perfectly.
Section 4. A chilling hidden motive. Now, we need to lower the volume a bit and brace ourselves for the devastating psychological twist behind all of this.
You know, the resolution of a mystery often digs up a dark truth that is incredibly difficult to stomach. We finally know the who and the how, but the why behind this 1999 tragedy carries a truly devastating psychological twist. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the jarring contrast between the two central figures of this story. On one side, you have Satoru's motive for a quarter of a century, this righteous, deeply loving patience aimed at preserving the truth and waiting for justice. And on the flip side, the killer's motive, a toxic obsession rooted in a high school crush and a subsequent rejection. One motive built a 26-year monument to love and truth, while the other destroyed a life over an adolescent grievance.
So the crucial point is this quote right here. She had a crush on Satoru in high school, and he rejected her. That's it.
The local woman who committed this horrendous act did so simply because of a teenage rejection. Think about the absolutely devastating irony here for a second. Sitaru spent 26 excruciating years searching for this faceless phantom who murdered his beloved wife, only to discover that the catalyst for the entire tragedy was his own, simple high school rejection of another person. The origin of his wife's murder was this deeply buried, long-harbored grudge directed entirely at him.
As we conclude this explainer, I really want you to reflect on the immense, heavy emotional toll of this story. 26 years of waiting, over a quarter of a century handing over money for an empty room, living with a ghost, fighting for a breakthrough. And it all stems from a high school rejection that somehow fermented into a lethal obsession. It shows us how deeply intertwined love, patience, and absolute tragedy can actually be. Sitaru finally got his answer, and his unbelievable dedication actually defeated a perfect crime. But at what emotional cost? It forces us to ask a really heavy question. When a mystery is finally solved after a lifetime of waiting, does the truth actually bring closure, or does it just unlock a completely different kind of pain?